PhD defense prep. Huh? Wow, that's quite a milestone you've reached. Congrats. Especially in psychology, at Reichman University, no less.
Oh, yeah. It's a big accomplishment reaching this stage. It really speaks to all the hard work and dedication someone's put in over the years.
And I think sometimes people sort of think, oh, the defense is just a formality, but
Oh, no, it's definitely not just a formality.
it's so much more than that.
Yeah, it's really a chance to show off all your expertise, engage in a real back and forth with those experts in your field about the research.
And to celebrate everything that you've done.
Yeah.
Speaking of celebrations, did you know in Finland, they give PhD grads an actual sword?
Really?
Yeah, can you imagine that ceremony?
Wow, that's wild. I don't think Reichman will be giving out swords, but they do have their own approach, to the PhD defense process. It's all outlined in their guidelines for students.
Right. You mean that document is specifically for the psychology department? I had a chance to look over it, and it seemed pretty useful.
Yeah, it's super helpful. It lays it all out step by step. Like,
Yeah.
to start with, Reichman uses a closed defense format.
So no big lecture hall full of people then?
Not for this one. It's going to be you presenting to a committee of experts in your specific field. It's a bit more, I guess you could say, intimate.
Yeah, I bet that makes it a little less scary,
Yeah.
knowing it's not a huge public event.
For sure, for sure. And the document, it outlines who's going to be on that committee, like what the criteria are they're going to use to evaluate you, and even gives you some tips on getting your presentation ready.
Oh, presentations. I remember being so nervous about mine. It's like stage fright, but for academics.
Oh, yeah, it's totally natural to feel nervous. I think the key is practice, practice, practice until you're comfortable with all the material. Reichman, in their guidelines, they really suggest structuring your presentation so that you can show a deep, thorough understanding of all the literature that's out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like they want to see that you didn't just, come up with this on your own, that you can really put your research into the context of the whole field, right?
Exactly, yeah. It shows you're not just, spitting out data, you're part of the scholarly conversation.
And that leads us to the Q&A session,
Ah, yes, the Q&A.
the part that probably keeps most PhD candidates up at night.
Yeah, it can be nerve-wracking for sure, but it's also a chance to show how quickly you think on your feet and, have a good stimulating discussion.
I remember one of our other sources mentioned that the committee might ask about the societal benefits of your research.
Yeah.
That one seems like a real thinker.
Oh, for sure. They really want you to go beyond just, the findings, the summary. They want you to be able to articulate the wider impact. Why does it matter? What's the relevance of this work?
It's almost like they're saying, okay, you did the research, now tell us. Why should we care?
Exactly. And actually, the Reichman guidelines, they touch on that too. They really emphasize that you got to show critical thinking, connect your research to the bigger picture.
So it's not just what you know, it's how you think.
Exactly. Precisely. It's all about showing that you can analyze, synthesize, draw meaningful conclusions from everything you've researched.
That reminds me of something else I read. It was a tip. Be prepared to talk about the limitations of your research.
Yeah.
No study's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Acknowledging those limitations, it really shows you're being intellectually honest, that you have a deep understanding of your work. And honestly, it can lead to really interesting discussions, and even future avenues of research.
It's fascinating how Reichman really put all this guidance together for their students. I wish I had something like that.
It really is a valuable resource, especially when you think about all the different ways PhD defenses are done around the world.
Yeah, right. Like that whole sword thing in Finland.
Exactly. But, going back to those Reichman guidelines, one thing that really stood out to me was how much they emphasize the relationship between the advisor and the student.
Oh, yeah, they talk about keeping those lines of communication open. Having regular meetings throughout the whole dissertation process, especially leading up to the defense.
Makes a lot of sense, having that supportive mentor who can guide you through. I think that can make all the difference.
I bet it can, especially with those pre-defense jitters, knowing that you have someone experienced in your corner.
For sure, absolutely. And they even go as far as to suggest, doing mock defenses with your advisor, maybe some other faculty members.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I mean, what better way to prepare than to actually, simulate the real thing?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gives you a chance to practice presentation, get some feedback on your arguments, work through any anxieties you might have about the Q&A.
Oh, speaking of the Q&A, some of the sources we've looked at, they offer some pretty good advice on handling those tougher questions. Like, what do you do if you get completely stumped?
Right. Well, one common tip is just take a breath, pause before you answer. It's totally okay to collect your thoughts for a sec, rather than just blurting out something you might regret.
That's good advice for life in general, really.
Yeah.
Don't just react, respond.
Absolutely. And it's also perfectly fine to ask for clarification, if you didn't quite understand the question.
That's a good point. Sometimes your nerves just make it hard to process information. There's no shame in just making sure that you're on the same page.
Exactly. The committee is going to respect that you're taking the time to understand.
Another tip I saw over and over was don't get defensive, even if you feel like you're being challenged by a committee member.
Oh, that's so key. It's important to remember this is a scholarly conversation, not a personal attack.
Right, so you're engaging with different perspectives, defending your argument in a respectful and reasoned way.
Yeah, and even if you disagree with a committee member, you can acknowledge their point of view and still, stand your ground.
It's a fine line, but it's a valuable skill to have. I mean, beyond just the PhD defense, right?
Totally, it's true. Being able to have a good debate is essential. I mean, in academia, in life,
Yeah.
So, we've talked about the big picture stuff, but what about the more practical tips that could make a difference?
Ooh, like what?
Well, one source, they talked about having a cheat sheet, like all the key points, figures from your research.
A cheat sheet. Tell me more.
So it's not about cheating, obviously. It's more about having like a quick reference guide, something you can glance at if you get stuck or need a reminder during the Q&A.
Okay.
So it might be, your hypothesis, some key findings, definitions of terms, whatever you think might be helpful.
Like a little lifeline in case you have a brain freeze.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's nice to know you have that backup.
And speaking of things that ease the nerves, one thing that really jumped out at me from the Reichman guidelines was the emphasis on self-care.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Getting enough sleep, eating well, doing things to manage that stress, it's all in there.
It's true. It's so easy to get caught up in everything and forget to take care of yourself.
But it's so crucial taking care of yourself physically and mentally. If you want to be at your best, the guidelines even suggest, putting breaks into your schedule, making time for things you enjoy.
I love that. It's like a reminder you're a human, not a dissertation machine.
Exactly, and that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's essential.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, from those finished swords to the practical stuff from Reichman.
Yeah, we talked about the big strategies, the little details that can make a difference on the big day.
One of the biggest takeaways for me is the PhD defense. It's not just about proving what you know. It's about showing how you think, how you're ready to contribute to psychology in a meaningful way.
It's about finding your voice as a scholar and sharing your passion with the world.
You know what? I have a feeling you're going to do great.
I think so too. You've put in the work, you've got the support, and you've got the passion. I think all the pieces are in place.
You've really given me a lot to think about, especially how Reichman emphasizes, the whole person being ready for this defense. It's not just the academics, it's taking care of yourself throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, it's holistic, right?
Yeah.
They get that you're going to be at your best intellectually if you're feeling good physically and emotionally too.
Makes sense. Defending your dissertation, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, speaking of marathons, one thing that struck me when we were talking about those tough questions was that advice to think of the defense as a conversation, not like an interrogation.
Well, that's a good point. It should feel like you're having a dialogue with the committee, not like you're on trial.
Right, exactly. And Reichman, in their guidelines, they frame it that way. They encourage students to see it as an opportunity, to share their research, talk about the implications with experts who are actually interested.
That really changes things, doesn't it? You go from feeling defensive to feeling like, hey, I'm sharing my passion with these people, with my colleagues.
It is. It makes for a more positive experience.
So don't dread the Q&A. Think of it as a chance to have a good conversation about something that you obviously care about.
Exactly. And remember, even the top experts in your field, they don't have all the answers.
It's okay to admit what you don't know, right? Like maybe point out areas for further research or even things that you're still trying to figure out.
Totally. In academia, intellectual humility is really important, showing that you're open to learning more.
It shows you're not just there to rattle off facts. You're part of this ongoing discovery process.
Which brings us back to one of the key things we've been talking about, right? Finding your own voice as a scholar.
Right. Both the Reichman guidelines and a lot of our other sources, they really highlight that.
It's not just about, mastering all the information. It's about developing your unique perspective. What do you bring to this conversation?
And that voice, that's what's going to come through, even if you stumble on a word or two or get a question that throws you off.
At the end of the day, the committee, they're looking for someone who's excited about their research, who's thought it through, and is ready to have that dialogue.
And that's you. So when you walk into that room, remember how much you've prepared, remember all the people who are supporting you, and most importantly, remember your passion, all the work you put in.
This is your moment to show everyone what you've learned, what you've accomplished. It's a celebration of your whole journey, and it's the launching pad for your future in the world of psychology.
We're so proud of you for getting to this point. Really, it's amazing. But now that you've got this defense down, how do you see your research making a difference? What are those next steps for sharing what you found and continuing on this path of discovery?